Best. Welcome. Imagine having a supernatural power on your side to help you through each day. This episode of Second Breakfast is brought to you by your higher power. Your higher power is free and ready to tap into at any time. The only cost is honesty. I use my higher power every day to pray for others and to ask for help. But most of all, I use my higher power to give thanks. You will be amazed at the changes in your life if you allow yourself to use this eternal free service. Well, let's get into the intro, and then we will be right back with the show. Just before we get into the show, we'd like to welcome you to Second Breakfast. This is the stream of consciousness that fills part of the gap between the nap and Blazing Cat for Fridays, which we do on Fridays at 9 o'clock instead of Second Breakfast. We're streaming on 3 platforms, we're streaming on 2 platforms, Rumble and YouTube. For some reason, X would not allow me to create a broadcast this morning. Doing a quick search, it said, well, if you have more than 100 broadcasts accumulated, then you might have run out of space. So I started deleting some old broadcasts to no avail. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. But right now, we're only broadcasting on Rumble and YouTube. So please give us a like, thumbs up, follow, share, subscribe, and all that jazz. The chat is up across those platforms. So please feel free to say anything. Comments drive the algorithm when I am not driving it down with my forbidden words. And as well, Rumble Studio has changed. It's changing their background area on how we can broadcast. So I've had to move to a new area. So setting up the broadcast today as well was a little different, which means that I'm having some issues with the preview window. And for some reason, I can't see what I'm broadcasting unless I look over at my big screen TV to double check to make sure the broadcast is actually happening. That's quite crazy. Anyway, let's get on with this. I hope you're having a wonderful morning and are ready to face the day with hope and love of your fellow man. And let's get into the first story. Right here, as you will remember, Lori Idlut, one of the 4 rats that has crossed the floor over to the Liberals. Well, we've been covering her story on and off since she crossed the floor, because she keeps being involved with unethical behavior, which makes complete sense that she would join the Liberals, being unethical. None of it. MP Lori Idlut, across the floor from NDP to the Liberals earlier this month, has reimbursed the House of Commons $1,700 after being caught expensing items he purchased for her office from Marving's Nunavut, his own private business. You know, when I was in Iqaluit for about 10 days, we were trapped there for about 10 days. We were trying to get up north to Pangerton for an exercise. We actually tried to fly out of Iqaluit twice before actually leaving on the third time, but we kept getting weathered in. We had to turn back and go back. The problem with flying in helicopters is that you can't fly above the cloud cover. You have to stay below the cloud cover. And if the cloud cover is, well, too low for you to fly properly, well, you're not going anywhere. Then again, the Canadian Forces members who were putting together this exercise, and that would be, the senior officers, were told, don't do the exercise up north in the month of August. Do it in July. July is the best time. It's the best weather. August, winter starts coming back in. We're going to have weather issues. So when do they do it? In August. As an exercise I wasn't supposed to attend, come back to the squadron from leave from a long chunk. I'd put a massive garden in. Of course, I still garden today. And I get to work and I go, yeah, we got to send you out for a month. And I'm like, crap, how am I the last person standing here? Like, at this time, I had quite a bit of experience in TACL. I said, well, everyone else is gone. You're the last person standing. So, oh, great. Then, of course, that night, a big microburst came through the property and destroyed half the garden. And other times, I would have probably fallen on my knees and said, but then again, I had to leave for a month. So I was like, oh, well, I guess God's will. There it is. But what she did is not God's will. So getting back to the carvings, none of it. While I was up there, we discovered that, people just make these carvings there constantly. You see piles of soap chip stones outside of other people's houses there because that's what they do. And some of them, in their desperation, will wander through one of the few bars that are there at night, trying to sell their carvings to people that are coming through Iqaluit. The prices are really high throughout the night. Then, as it gets closer to closing time, the price keeps coming down, and then you discover it's quite a sad thing because they're only just trying to sell it so they can raise some money so they can spend it there at the bar. And so, of course, I ended up meeting a few other characters there that take advantage of these people who are creating these carvings. And so they sneak in booze because they're not allowed to fly in booze there, and then they exchange the booze to these people for these carvings for next to nothing. And then, of course, they just make a killing selling the carvings. So there's a lot of exploitation happening up there. And I wonder, I'm just saying, that was my experience when I was up there, when I saw what was happening with the carvings. I'm saying this is what's happening with her business. I'm just saying there's a lot of shady crap happening up there. So, speaking of shady crap, here's an experience from this pastor in Windsor.
Approached me on Sunday. We were having church with about 15 people or so. She said I couldn't be there. I want to make sure I'm doing everything right. I gave him the whole story. And the answer was clear. The officer was actually kind of confused as to why this would even be a problem. And he said, no, it's fine.
There's nothing criminal about gathering in a park. That's not, there's nothing criminal about that. Unless you guys were like pointing on the grass and destroying city property, then maybe you can get like a mischief call. But if you're just there gathering, there's nothing wrong with that.
The answer was clear. As long as you're under 25 people, gathering in a public park does not require a permit. And like I said, we had 10 people. 10 people. We were well within the legal limit here of the bylaw. And so I had done my homework and I went back and we set up and we worshiped and we opened the Word of God. And then somebody made a phone call. A disgruntled woke liberal had apparently been listening to my preaching and did not like what was heard. This individual didn't like that I had connected the mark of the beast from Revelation 13. Now, I was preaching through the whole book of Revelation, just happened to be on that chapter, and I connected the mark of the beast to the COVID vaccine mandates in my interpretation. Now, you can agree or disagree with that theological position. That's fine. That's what free people do. They debate ideas. You don't have to agree. But in Canada in 2023, which is when this happened, apparently incorrect Bible interpretations that you think are incorrect and that you disagree with is cause to call the police. And so that Sunday morning, as I was preaching, officers arrived and they had a problem with me. Their first issue was the microphone. The amplification. They said you can't have amplification in the park.
Yeah, you can't have a microphone.
Okay, so I turn the mic off.
Are you gonna let me finish?
No, because you're
Okay, then
violating
you know what?
my laws.
We'll start removing everybody.
No, listen. I take the sign down. I take the speaker. Am I still allowed?
No, because this is renting city property for the purpose that you're.
We're not.
He called Windsor Police
I
on
called
Friday,
you guys
and they
this
said
Friday.
Property. This is city property.
Listen to me. I called you guys Friday. I said, can I gather in the park with like 10 of my friends to worship God? He said, absolutely you can.
Not on a microphone, though.
Okay, I'll turn it off. I'll turn it off.
And so I said, okay, no problem. I'll turn it off. I immediately agreed. I'll turn it off. Right then and there. No problem. I shut off the microphone. No argument, no pushback. Should have been problem solved, right? But here's the thing about power and the not wanting people to speak what you don't like. The real goal wasn't to stop amplification. The real goal was to shut me down. It was compliance no matter what. Get out. They'll find another reason. And they did. That moment, as soon as I said, no problem, I'll turn it off, they came back with another situation, another change. They're moving the goalposts. Now I was trespassing. Imagine trespassing in a public park that I had a legal right to be in with just 10 people. And so I asked them, what law am I breaking? They gave me a ticket here. As this is the actual physical ticket, I kept it. They gave me a ticket here, and you can't see on the video, but the ticket says that I did commit the offense of engage in prohibited activity on premises contrary to the Trespass of Property Act. Prohibited activity. And so I said, okay, what is the prohibited activity? They wouldn't tell me. They refused to specify what the prohibited activity was. Think about that.
Indeed, think about that. Because that's what fascists do. That's what National Socialism is. For your safety. Oh, what did I do wrong? You don't need to know. Get over there. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this is how the far left works. And this is how wokeism works. You don't get a say. You're a second-class citizen. You will listen to us. Totalitarianism, authoritarianism. They will not stop until they get their way. And how do they do it? By building a mountain of skulls. We've talked about this before. How they are getting rid of Canadian citizens in many different ways. One of them is by doing the opposite, right? So when they say something called harm reduction, actually what it is death explosion.
On the streets of Vancouver, and families bury their children. An entire industry has grown up around Canada's drug crisis. Taxpayer-funded programs hand out the opioids, vending machines dispense the drugs, and now we're learning that some of the very people who push these policies may have built businesses around them. If that's true, this is evil profiteering off human misery, and the people paying the price are the addicts themselves. While politicians and public health bureaucrats debate ideology in conference rooms, the reality on the streets of Canada is brutal. People are dying. They're languishing in absolute misery. Families are watching their loved ones slowly disappear into addiction and worse. And in British Columbia, the death toll, well, it just keeps climbing. In January alone, 150 people died from toxic drugs in BC. That's nearly 5 people every single day. 5 people who didn't get recovery, 5 people who didn't get their lives back, 5 people whose addictions were managed instead of ended.
If you want to watch the rest, please go to Rebel News. Just another example that we seem to have every single day of the liberal disrespect for human life. They don't respect human life whatsoever. They have built their power on a mountain of skulls, and they will continue to treat life as expendable as long as they keep making their money. And as you can see here, as we knew it would, just like in the maid industry, by the way, people are making a profit. Yeah, it's not about healthcare when it comes to maid. It's about saving money. It's about money, just like in this harm reduction. It's not about helping people. It's about some people making money. And all this fentanyl that they're giving to the people to inject safely in these drug dens. Who's making the money off that? Who's making the fentanyl? Well, that would be the drug cartels that the Liberals have allowed to operate in Canada with impunity and have done next to nothing to deal with them whatsoever. Even though the United States have been pointing this out for over a year now, saying, Canada, get your SHIT together because you're allowing drugs to travel over our international border into the U.S. from Canada because you have drug cartels operating in Canada using precursor drugs from Asia. Right? No, nothing. We're still every day. Of course, they double down. So if you want to watch more, I also have a video out called Drug Den Mama, and you can see our portentous Liberal health minister, who doesn't look healthy at all, given the size of her, tell us that, giving more drugs to addicts is a good thing. Yes, this will help them get off drugs, giving them more drugs. She's a moron, an absolute moron. Well, speaking of Maid, this should disturb you. This should disturb you absolutely.
I am 84 years old, and a year ago, an amazing thing happened. When I got out of bed one morning, I was suddenly in excruciating pain, so much so that my daughter came running in from another room. She called an ambulance. Off I went to the Vancouver General Hospital, and I was approached by a young lady doctor who the very first words out of her mouth is, "We would like to offer you Maid." I was taken aback. That was the last thing on my mind. I just wanted to find out why I was in pain. I did not want to die. And I was a month in hospital, came home and recuperated nicely enough that I could take some trips. Off I went last year to Cuba, before the problems today in Cuba. And then just recently, I have been to Mexico and Guatemala. So my recovery has been amazing, and there was no need for Maid to even be suggested.
Indeed, no need whatsoever for Maid to ever be suggested. But here in Canada now, we have a healthcare system that is now dependent on killing its patients in order to save money. So it's no surprise that what we saw in Alberta recently of the premier coming out and going, this kind of behavior is unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. And here we have Ace of Spades. It happened to my sister, she writes. She signed the papers after being admitted into hospital. Oh, I'm sorry, I must be getting some reverb here. There we go. Her reading glasses were at home. Her son was not informed. They called him in the early hours of the morning to tell him she had passed. When he asked about her cause of death, he was told she requested Maid. We all know she never would have signed those papers had she known what she was signing. And here she's, of course, tapping here Justice Center Constitutional Freedoms, another disturbing example of Canada's reckless assisted suicide policy. A family member learned their mother had been euthanized only after the fact, through a call from a doctor they had never met. No notice, no conversation, no chance to say goodbye. What the hell is going on in Canada? That life now means nothing. It's so cheap. We're just a bunch of carbon credits now. Just a bunch of carbon credits now for the Liberals to use and abuse. Stephanie Kuzi writes, for nearly a month, Canadians have been without independent oversight of Liberal spending due to the Prime Minister's decision to fire Mr. Jacques over his critique of stupefying and unsustainable spending by the Liberals. Something, of course, the Liberals will deny. They said, oh, his contract just expired and we didn't renew it. Yeah, so Carney could bring in one of his friends appointed to that. I guess the Conservatives will be asking that person questions soon. On Monday, MPs will finally hear from the government's hand-picked appointee for the PBO. This independent officer serves Parliament, not the Prime Minister's office, and Conservatives will ensure the proposed candidate understands that. Well, they can try to ensure all they want, but they can't force that person to be unethical. because every single person that seems associated with the Liberals greatly participate in unethical behavior that usually leads into the death of other Canadians for somebody to make money. Yeah. It's just funny how that's been working over the last 11 years, and for some reason, most people aren't talking about it. Well, and people who do talk about it, we keep getting canceled and ratioed out. Mark Miller writes in the third person, which is why I put this up here, because typically, why would I put anything up by Mark Miller? Person who destroyed Canada with his unvetted mass immigration. Every ministry he gets involved in turns into a bloody disaster. It's a wonder he's still a minister at all, but there he is, talking about himself in third person like a mental defect. Then again, you have to understand these accounts are rarely even touched by these ministers. They're managed by somebody else. You got your little gray check mark here. Now, I get a question about the gray check mark. Why is Justin Trudeau still running around with a gray check mark? Do you keep your gray check mark forever once you've been in government? Is that how that works? Or is it just kept there for as long as that account was purchased for that year? Because usually you purchase your X account for a full year. So maybe once that year runs out, then the gray check runs out? I don't know. It's kind of weird. It's weird. Very weird. Miller says of himself, 23 radio stations across Canada will benefit from the $17 million he called the funding critical, because these stations often broadcast to remote communities where they might not get news from other sources. Well, that's why Canada had the Broadcast Act in the 1930s. I think it was 1933, the original Broadcast Act that mandated that CBC would exist and we would have radio stations across Canada. That was the original intent of the Broadcast Act, to keep those radio stations alive. And I think it's a good idea to actually keep radio stations going alive, funded for even emergencies, right? But give them a set amount and turn them more into like community outlets for people to go in and do their own shows if they want, like they do at universities. But no, that's not what it turned into. It just turns into a giant cash boondoggle where Liberals appoint their friends to manage it and run it and be there, and everything Liberals touch turns to shit and turns into corruption. Absolutely everything, right? And that's why people post these reactions like this, because they know it's nothing but propaganda and manipulation on behalf of the Liberals using your tax money to do it. Here's another example. $17.2 million over 2 years for podcasts is really what Mark Miller was talking about. Who wants to check how much this cash sits in each of these bands' bank accounts? Right? What was he doing? Well, he's got a little picture here. Indigenous peoples are the guardians of their stories. So they're investing to support Indigenous stories through broadcasting. Tools to empower them to tell these stories, preserve their cultures and identities, and advance reconciliation. That's all stuff they could have done on their own. It's all stuff that they could just do on their own. Look, I'm doing this on my own right here. Is it costing the government any money? Nada. Mocha Bezergan writes, "Get the F out of here," screams someone in quotation marks. Indigenous crowd surrounds counter-protester demanding that she leaves. Yes, it's more of the mass graves insanity. In Calgary, Alberta, an event is underway regarding the relocation of Sacred Memorial. It is attended by Canadian political scientist Francis Widdowson, who questions the narrative of 215 unmarked graves of children allegedly found in Kamloops, BC, arguing that it lacks evidence. And true. Show me the body. Show me the body. Show me the body. There's no bodies. There's no bodies. There's ground-penetrating radar that found echoes of voids. Yes, we're protesting. We're saying that we brought our flags at half-mast for 18 months in Canada for voids in the ground. We turned every Canadian white person into a racist, accused by the Liberals of genocide for voids. We've had over 100 churches attacked and some of them burnt down because of this propaganda of genocide over voids in the ground. And people still think these voids are bodies and they have been given money to dig up the bodies, but instead they pocketed the money, and then they tried to hide the documents saying where they spent the money, and they still haven't dug up any bodies, and still people are acting like crazy birds, screaming at them that they're racist for denying that there are no bodies. And there's no bodies! This is wokeism. This entire show is going to be about wokeism, looks like. Well, let's listen to, I could put up the video, but they're just screaming at her constantly. And luckily, they're not doing any violence this time, but typically they do. In your face. Always wanting their mountain of skulls. Here's Prime Minister Carney. If you didn't know this has been repeated often. I know I have. Brookfield's influence peddling employee, Mark Carney, staged a soft coup to overthrow Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to obtain diplomatic immunity. Diplomatic immunity, you say? Carney was being investigated by the Biden government for violating antitrust laws. The United States Department of Justice was investigating Mark Carney. Carney was being investigated. They had evidence to indict the climate cartel boss, Mark Carney. Oh, indeed. Well, let's look at these pictures here before we move on to the next one. What is diplomatic immunity? Diplomatic immunity is a principle of international law by which certain foreign government officials are not subject to the jurisdiction of local courts and other authorities for both their official and, to a large extent, their personal activities. Now, here from Reuters, this is from 2024 in June. It's coming up on 2 years from now. Exclusive U.S. House Committee grills Carney, Shapiro to push against climate coalitions. Indeed. Next picture, please. June 7, right? U.S. Lawmakers Committee conducted interviews with the two Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, leaders, former central bank governor Mark Carney and former U.S. Securities and Exchange Commissioner Chair Mary Shapiro, in an escalation of their push against global coalitions to tackle climate change. The House of Representatives Judiciary Committee, which is controlled by the Republicans led by its chairman, Jim Jordan, set up their interviews earlier this year out of concern that GFANZ appears to facilitate collusion that may violate U.S. antitrust laws. According to letters to GFANZ staff reviewed by Reuters and people familiar with the matter, where a candidate has engaged in bribery or some other form of corruption is being elected, severe penalties are provided for, including several years of disqualification from candidacy and voting in subsequent elections. Fines, imprisonment, or both is avoided election, the loss of the right to sit or vote in the House of Commons. So I don't know where they got that little picture from. So here's another one. Antitrust violations occur when antitrust laws are laws protecting trade and commerce from abuses, practices such as price fixing, restraints, price discrimination, monopolization are broken. The three key federal statutes of antitrust law are the Sherman Act, Clayton Act, and let's see, there's some jail time and up to $100 million per violation. Wow. All right, so I want to go down to the other picture here from NewsCare, where we get into the Judiciary Committee itself, and where they write antitrust law prohibits anti-competitive collusion. Right, the Committee on the Judiciary is entrusted with the protection of trade, commerce, blah, 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 such as anti-competitive collusion. In exercising this oversight of the adequacy and sufficiency of the existing U.S. antitrust laws, the committee has been investigating apparent collusion between left-wing activists and major financial institutions to impose radical environmental, social, and governance, also known as ESG, goals upon the American people. This collusion not only violates fundamental free market principles, it also threatens to raise costs and reduce choice for millions of American consumers. And that right there sums up exactly what the Liberals have been doing to Canada since they've been in. ramming these EV laws down our throats, destroying competition with everything they do. Why is there any competition in the housing? No, the government's taken that over. Is there any competition in providing lunches to kids? Corporation, companies saying, "Hey, I would like to come in and actually, if you could pay us to give." Oh no, the government's paying for that too. What? Yes, that's right. People being able to afford their own dental stuff? Nope, government's providing that too. The government's starting to provide almost everything, just a national socialist that they are. And how do they do it? Well, they've got this big net zero policy of theirs, and that's destroying everything that we have in society because we're based on a system of merit and stuff that works, not unicorn farts and fairy dust to make our system work, which apparently that's all net zero is because the money only goes one way, and that seems to be in Carney's pocket. The committee has obtained evidence that a climate cartel of left-wing environmental activists and major financial institutions has colluded to force American companies to decarbonize and reach net zero. Well, through their commitments to groups such as Climate Action 100+, the members of the climate cartel expressly have agreed to decarbonize the American economy by forcing corporations to disclose their carbon emissions, to reduce their carbon emissions, and enforce and reinforce their disclosure and reduction commitments by handcuffing company leadership and muzzling corporate free speech and petitioning. Climate cartel imposes these radical policies by weaponizing ever-escalating pressure tactics that start with negotiations with corporate management, continue to filing and flagging stockholder proxy resolutions, and culminate with taking out the boards of directors at recalcitrant companies. Climate cartel's members include the convening and collaborating groups like Action 100+, the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, and the G-Fans. Right. So, why is Mark Carney Prime Minister? So that he could avoid being arrested. I'm not going to arrest the Prime Minister of another nation, even if they've been found guilty in a Department of Justice investigation, even if they found you at the top of the climate cartel. I'm not going to arrest you just yet. I guess your crimes don't go that high yet. They have 4 years. They have 4 years to charge Carney. Can't do it as long as he's Prime Minister. That's why he's Prime Minister. So if he can hold on to the Prime Minister position for 4 years, which is why he's bribing people to cross the floor to get his majority, then he's off scot-free, and then he can keep manipulating the Canadian economy through policy to enrich his massive net zero stock portfolio. That right there is the ultimate in liberal corruption. Peter Clark writes, speaking of corruption, trillions of leaves are currently breathing more deeply across the planet. And why is that? While the world stays glued to dead screens filled with narratives of collapsing planet and much bigger stories unfolding right outside our windows. It's not a story of sinking abyss, but a world coming to life. The data is in and the earth is greening at a rate that defies the code red message. Yes, this has been available to people for a while now. There's too much carbon dioxide. People don't realize 4,000 parts per million is the maximum safe level of carbon dioxide inside a submarine. And you're not even going to reach 0.2% of that outside. So when people are screaming, no, there's too much carbon dioxide, listen to, what are you going to do? It's not like giant garbage. It's not like giant dump trucks filled with carbon pull up to the planet and dump the carbon onto the planet. No, we have a fixed amount of carbon within our planet, unless we get hit by something that brings us more carbon. We have a fixed amount here in Canada. On the planet, we have a fixed amount of carbon. So the carbon gets recycled. Sometimes we throw too much up, but it still gets recycled. But humanity can never throw up that much carbon up that is going to affect the entire planet more than a couple of volcanoes will. I mean, seriously. The hubris that they think that humans can affect the climate when we are orbiting a massive ball of plasma that keeps us from turning into an ice age, of which the planet has been in ice ages longer than it has been thought out. So people should be happy when it's warm. But no, the far left always needs to weaponize something in order to turn you into a victim so that they can come in as a savior. The problem is with pointing out victims means you have to find an oppressor, which means in most cases they have to fabricate one. And in this case, a fabricated climate change narrative. Let's admit Prime Minister misled the media. Yes, because he's a bald-faced liar. Mark Carney has been lying to Canadians about his meeting with Chinese communist leaders. What was he lying about? The fact that he said he brought up human rights issues, when in fact, they not. Not a single thing. The answers were answered by crazy Kevin Lamoureux. I always have a few videos about how apoplectic he is within the House of Parliament, screaming at you like a raging lunatic. Well, I say like a raging alcoholic who's just waiting to get his next drink at the end of question period. The way he acts. But he's in that position and he had to provide these answers, and he provided the written answer that said, yeah, the Prime Minister did not bring that up. Says he's a lying effing, you know what he is. Now, meanwhile, Jable Salt rebroadcast this here by Mr. Cooper, MP out in Alberta, retired RCMP director, and MP Cooper revealed that Carney and the RCMP signed a security agreement with the same Chinese department who installed 4 Chinese police stations in Canada to intimidate diaspora. So, how is this not treason to allow a foreign nation to operate police stations in your own country? How is this not treason, folks?
Security. For Iraq's so-called strategic partnership with the Beijing dictatorship includes an agreement on law enforcement cooperation between the RCMP and Beijing's Ministry of Public Security. For the record, this is the same Ministry of Public Security that was involved in operating several illegal police stations in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver to spy, harass, intimidate, and coerce diaspora communities. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. Is it accurate to say that Beijing's overriding consideration for law enforcement is to advance the interests of the Chinese Communist Party?
Law enforcement in China is part of the PRC apparatus. You can't separate them from the government, and they do not operate under the rule of law. I experienced it firsthand. I experienced it on one occasion when probably a year before I took my retirement, I was tasked with meeting a delegation from China. This is the last time they came over looking for people under an alleged economic offense, and I put it in quotations. And they wanted, they basically literally sat down in the room. There was 4 Chinese from the delegation and stated, "We expect you to identify where they are and we'll look after it from there." Quote, unquote.
So, as you noted, we're not dealing with a regime that respects the rule of law, due process, judicial independence, or other legal and ethical constraints that our law enforcement are bound by. So, is it fair to say that when Canada cooperates with such a system, with such a regime, we're not an equal partner?
Not even close. They have a total different agenda than what we have, and I think it puts... I don't see how the RCMP can operate under this secret agreement. I think it's flawed and is dangerous to not our economic, but our security interests.
Okay, so recently 10 Hong Kong diaspora organizations sent an open letter to Mark Carney expressing deep fear and anxiety about this agreement. In essence, they are concerned that Beijing will use this agreement to target political opponents of the regime in Canada under the guise of law enforcement. You provided, I think, an example of that. Would you agree that those concerns are valid?
Absolutely. In fact, that's the reason I believe the police stations were set up here in the first place. It's to push their agenda, and we have to understand that they have a number of united front organizations operating in this country, which also support anything that the alleged police stations would do.
Well, here we have Canada.
So liberals have compromised Canada's security. Liberals have compromised the RCMP. At this point, knowing that the RCMP are in cahoots with the Chinese Communist Party militant arm, I wouldn't trust the RCMP with anything. You don't know if they're in cahoots with Chinese communists. That little RCMP officer that walks to your door, if you're in one of those provinces that uses the RCMP for provincial police because you don't have your own provincial police, how can you trust them? How can you trust them to have your best interests at heart when they are in league with murderous communists? That's where we are. Laurie Goldstein writes, RCMP Commissioner Mike Duhaime says, based on the information before him, there are no longer clandestine activities or transnational repression taking place in Canada that is linked to the government of India. Just like that. At the snap of his fingers, transnational repression has vanished from India. Just like that. Yeah, all our jails that are filled full of people from India that have created crimes, that's your imagination now. Doesn't exist anymore. That's a complete fabrication of the far right. Oh, scary. No, more lies. Again, statements like this. What do you think Canadians are going to respect you? Going to believe you? No, you've just done even more damage. So you're in cahoots with Chinese communists, and now you're outright lying to us like Chinese communists? My God, Canada has fallen so far under this mischievous liberal government. They're not even a government. And they're more like a criminal cartel. Here we have Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms announces the launch of a national petition calling upon all members of Parliament to defeat Bill C-22, legislation that will significantly expand government surveillance powers. If passed into law, Bill C-22 will empower the federal government to order electronic service providers to develop capacity for extracting and organizing Canadians' data for government and law enforcement review. Oh, great. Yes, because the government has such a good track record of protecting your data from people stealing it, which they don't. And of course, when the government spends money on IT, like we see with the Kuram software with OAS, $6.6 billion, $5 billion over budget, and still 5,000 seniors can't get their checks for over 8 months. Oh, we had to replace it. The old system was going to fail. Well, guess what? You replace it with a failing system. Because we couldn't even be smart enough to do concurrent activities to ensure that the new system was going to work as good as the old one. No, it was about hiring your own IT people, your own liberal friends, so they could pocket the money with $5 billion in overcosts that you say, oh, that was budgeted for. Yeah. No. If you change the budget to cover budgeting overcosts that were never there in the first place, that doesn't mean you budgeted for it. You budgeted for it after the fact. And, of course, you refuse to open up the book. So we don't know if anything you say is true. So we will just assume you're lying because, well, there's plenty of evidence you're lying. Install devices that allow government and law enforcement to access Canadians' data. Oh, great. That's another going to force the installation of devices. Now, I don't know if this is going to be at home. Probably not, but it'll probably be in your internet providers. Yeah, great. More cost for them. Where do you think that cost is going to be downloaded to? To the user. They're not going to fucking pay for this out of pocket. Retain Canada's data for up to 1 year. So now they're adding an additional cost to the providers in Canada to meet these requirements. Who's going to pay for it? It's going to be you. You're either way. If the government says, no, we'll cover the cost. No. They're not covering the cost. It's your money. even if they were covering the costs. But yeah, Mario gives us the warning. Liberals aren't hiding it anymore. Warrants don't mean poop. If they think you're a threat, they're tapping your phone, your internet, everything. They're building up their compromat. Who needs opposition research when you've got CSIS doing it for you? And remember, CSIS, a couple of days ago, come out and said, Islamophobia! Oh my goodness! Going on about Islamophobia when you just had a week of anti-Semitism, people being shot, people being murdered by Islamists, people with a bounty on their head, a politician with a bounty on their head from Islamists, and you're going on about Islamophobia. Listen to this clown here.
It is not about the surveillance of honest, hardworking Canadians going on about their daily lives. It is, however, about keeping Canadians safe in the online space. It brings our laws in line with the Supreme Court rulings to make clear that law enforcement and CSIS can receive tips, ask for information to be provided voluntarily, or use publicly available information to investigate crime and threats to our security. In these cases, a warrant will not be necessary.
A warrant will not be necessary. And there we go. A warrant will not be necessary. That's the line. That's the line we told you they would cross, and they're crossing it. That's where we move from a democracy into a dictatorship. It's only a matter of time. The star chambers are already there. They will just say, oh, you have no right to know. You have no right to know why we've canceled everything, why we've canceled your life. Somebody accused you, and you have no right to know. Yeah, you can be under secret observation now from the government, just like in a communist state, and be arrested by these fucking communists who are filling their pockets with your taxpayer cash with no accountability whatsoever. Oh, yeah. And of course, this guy, what's he doing right now? He's trying to confiscate all your guns for your safety. They are so much like the Nazis in 1930s Germany. These National Socialists, they're doing everything the Nazis did in Germany. Massive eugenics program, killing off the useless eaters, confiscating guns, lying to your face nonstop, using propaganda to change people's minds. And now, of course, they've changed the laws, right? And they always have someone for you to fear, right? So that you fear that other, so that they can bring in these intrusive laws and make you under their control through fear. Everything has been going according to plan. Everything. The only thing that they didn't plan for was the amount of voices online that are going to keep pointing out the fact that they are fascists. Until, of course, they come knocking on my door. Goldie Gamari. Wow, this is about me, she writes, and the death threats bounty on my head. Thank you, Department of Justice. Thank you, President Trump. God bless America. Because here, Sam Cooper writes, DOJ seizes Iranian intelligence website behind the $250,000 beheading bounty on Canadian politician. Yeah. Cartel directed to kill her at Ottawa home. Now, who is Goldie? Well, Goldie had pretty well brought out the warning signs on this before, and she was serving in the progressive conservative government in the province. Premier Doug Ford removed her because of her ongoing criticism of Islamists and her association with those who thought the same way. This happened back in June 28, 2024. Now the U.S. Department of Justice has revealed the Islamists in Iran had a $250,000 contract to have her killed. The killing was to have been done by Jalisco cartel. She was right. Doug Ford is a numpty. Indeed, Doug Ford is a big numpty. Most politicians are numpties, by the way, because when you try to show them the facts and the truth, they just call you a racist, or they do what Numpty Ford did here. Now that he's got pie on his face, is he going to apologize? Of course not, because he's a progressive. And progressives, like all the other leftoids out there, he's not a conservative. He's a progressive. None of them ever take accountability for anything they ever did wrong in the past, because that would weaken their eventual plan to have complete, total power. You can't have somebody thinking ill of you if you want to have total control, because they might start asking questions. And have questions, that's why you need to control the press. At Canada Right's Liberal Defence Minister David McGuinty was asked why the Liberals kept the news of Iranian missiles hitting a base hosting Canadian forces in Kuwait a secret. McGuinty implies it would be compromised security and claims Puliev doesn't have a security clearance. Well, okay, so here's the biggest problem with that. First off, what the hell does security clearance have to do with you telling Canadians that their troops were attacked? The Italians did it the same day, and you said it was for security. Bullshit. Just like all those other National Socialist arguments about safety. It's for your safety. Oh, it's for safety. It's for operational safety. But then again, this guy couldn't get his story straight. He said he heard it from his people. No, wait, he heard it from the press first. No, wait, he heard it from his people. Oh, now he's upset. Now he's upset that he's being called on his lies. And so what does he do? He says something completely absurd, that the fact that NSICOP additional security level wasn't obtained by the leader of the opposition is the reason why the troops in Kuwait were attacked. Wait, what? What? Oh, sorry. It's the reason why you couldn't be told. Wait, what? No, that doesn't make any sense either, because you didn't tell the other party leaders of the NDP or the Bloc Québécois or the Green Party, who each of them have their NSICOP level, by the way. Well, I don't know about the NDP. Maybe Davies has it now. I don't know. But anyway, at least the other two parties do. And you didn't tell them? You didn't tell them anything. So what the hell does NSICOP have to do at all? Oh, no, because we know what it is. It's a gag order that once they get it, you can tell them anything you want, especially stuff that involves liberal fuckery, and they can't say dick all about it because you will throw them in jail. Yeah, that's why Pierre's not doing it. That's why you guys keep trotting it out like it's a thing. Like it's a thing that even Bernie doesn't even have to sign, because guess what? He's prime minister, so he doesn't need an NSICOP security clearance, which, strangely enough, was created by Justin Trudeau, who also never got it, right? So tell me this. The prime minister doesn't have to get his NSICOP level because he's prime minister. Shouldn't he be required to get the NSICOP level before he is removed as prime minister to ensure that he maintains that same level of security clearance? Because you're still beholden to that for 2 years, at the very least. And in some cases, depending on your security level, some stuff you'll never be able to talk about at all. That's the beauty of security clearances, of which, by the way, Polyev has already had when he was in cabinet before the Liberals added new NSICOP, so that this clown can bring it up as an excuse for not letting Canadians know about the state of their own troops. These people are complete clown work, by the way. They just injured a bunch of their own troops again up north on a winter exercise. A bunch of them lost their fingers and toes because these idiots purged the military of people who had common sense through their DEI infatuation of tampons in the men's room, and of course the prior purge of 10% of the armed forces of people who refused to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Yeah. So you purge the military of people that actually had the corporate knowledge, could do the job, so that you could bring in your own wankers and your political officers. And what happened? Well, now you have them tell you, oh, God forbid we tell our troops, we tell our people back home that, we had a base attack. No, there was a real political reason for it as well, right? Because if you let people know that the Iranians lobbed a missile onto Canadian troops, then Canadians might think, hey, maybe these Iranians are bad dudes. Maybe we should support Trump, and you can't have that, right? You can't have your narrative changed. That's why you really didn't want to say anything, waiting for it to vanish down the the line of news that happens every day that gets forgotten about, right? Same way you're trying to get people to forget about your crimes of the COVID-19 vaccine, hoping that as long as we don't talk about it, as long as we hope it just vanishes down the road, people will stop talking about it and they'll forget about it, forget about your crimes against humanity, forget about all your lies. Not gonna happen, buddy. Why? Because there's just too much online and there's just too much information. Unless, of course, you come and arrest us all and kill us all. Until then, we're going to keep telling what you people are doing to Canada. Mark Carney writes, to reduce our military's reliance on foreign suppliers, Canada's government is gearing up domestic production and building our supply here at home. Wow. Same stuff that happened in Yugoslavia when they just started gearing up their defense industry because there was nothing left. Everything else had been stripped out by the socialists. So they just trained their entire industry into war. Kind of like what the Liberals are doing. Tells on Wheel, of course, responds in regards to all this BS. So on the 17th, the defense minister said, the government withheld information regarding an Iranian strike on the base in Kuwait to protect the operational security of Canadian Armed Forces personnel. And now today, he says he learned about it from a newspaper. Well, which is it? The defense minister says he didn't know about Iranian strike on base housing Canadians until after the media report. We don't know what they don't know. We don't know what kind of lies they're trying to say. But what we do know is that they will never get their story straight. National Post writes, while we're on the path of wokeism, DEI destroying Canada, a Quebec human rights case over job posting excluding white applicants dismissed as ideological, writes Zarkonaje. So let's look at this piece right here. Right. So discrimination against white heterosexual able-bodied men is enshrined in Section 15.2 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms of Section 2 of the Employment Equity Act. Every individual has a right, but the act is to achieve equality in the workplace so that no person shall be denied employment. So what happened? Well, it seems that, let's go here, and Quebec government-sponsored racial discrimination is okay. Quebec Oiseau, which is the nonprofit organization, had posted applications for a job in 2021 and said that they would refuse applications from white people. A blatant racist job posting. So there was a law student with a background in sustainability, an interest in environmental issues, and natural sense of justice discovered that Quebec Oiseau's race-restricted posting for a worker to help reduce threats to birds in urban habitats. She submitted a complaint to the Human Rights Tribunal arguing the job posting was exclusionary, but was dismissed outright. Her complaint was tossed for a number of reasons. One, the tribunal didn't accept that she was ever trying to get the job, which the human rights adjudicator considered necessary for discrimination to have occurred. So it's not the fact that they verbally posted it on their site that they're discriminating. Someone had to actually be discriminated against. It's not the fact that people would read that and go, oh, they're not going to hire me, so I might as well not offer. Them being discriminated, all those people that would never approach a tribunal. She hadn't actually applied, and the adjudicator scrutinized her finances as well as her education and employment situations, concluding that she wasn't really looking to be hired. Instead, her motivation was pegged as ideological. Now remember, these tribunals are not staffed by lawyers or people who then need legal training. They're political appointees. Yeah, political appointees. That's who's making these judges, just like in a communist system. It is clear that her objective in bringing an action against Quebec Oiseau to assert the theory that affirmative action is contrary to the right to equality and the Quebec Charter, reads the decision. The student was also part of a group that opposed race-based programs and had given a talk that criticized affirmative action, which drew the ire of human rights adjudicator. It also appears from the evidence that she had a motivation other than her interest in the position, namely to advance the causes of universalism and resistance against wokeism by preventing the implementation of affirmative action programs in Quebec. When you compare this with other cases, it's clear that Quebec's Human Rights Tribunal has a political agenda. This is the same entity in October forced a hair salon to pay $500 for not including a non-binary option in its online booking form, causing great offense in the mind of a bald, non-binary serial complainer. So, it's okay for the far-left serial complainers to go to the tribunal and get money, but it's not okay for people who complains about these abuses, according to our charter. And then the woke tribunal says, you're just against wokeism. Dismissed. What? Yeah. There's your agenda right there. Blatant, far-left, cultural Marxist agenda, pervasive throughout Canada, destroying us from within. Elon Musk writes, madness. Why is he writing madness? Well, Shakespeare's birthplace to be decolonized over fears his success benefits the ideology of white European supremacy. This is the far left idiocy we are dealing with. Throughout the planet, throughout the Western world, this cultural Marxist ideology, destroying our culture from within, is one of those leftovers from the Soviet Union when they set up their communist agents throughout Western civilization to destroy the West from within. They have adapted their policies throughout the years, creating the situation we now have, where you have morons with fantasies in their head thinking it's real, trying to impose these fantasies on other people. Bullshit like this. Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. The Ontario Court of Appeal has ruled against free expression in Ontario by allowing the city of Hamilton to censor a paid bus shelter advertisement. The ad featured an image of a biological woman alongside the statement, woman, an adult female. Oh my God, the hate! Oh! Court accepted that the city could restrict the group's free expression because it might offend some transit users. Are you effing kidding me? So, they could see a picture like that and would make them lose their minds and turn them into criminals? What? 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 The court accepted the city could restrict the group's free expression because it might offend somebody. It might cause an emotional reaction in somebody. What the hell? So, this is where it gets crazy, right? Because they get to pick now what is offensive and what isn't. Because you could have other people saying, well, that ad offends me. I want it off. Well, that one offends me. This one offends me. Offends me. Stop off. They're going to say, well, no, you can't start doing that. Well, you just did it there. So when does it stop? The court seems unable to grasp that free speech cannot exist at all when some people, all people, have a legal right not to be offended. Mother of God, what is happening in our country? Scott Carpenter writes, immigrant in my business right now, originally from China, who has been here 40 years, says he's going to sell his house and get out of Canada. I'm not sure where he's going yet. He lives in Burnaby, BC. Says Canadians are the dumbest people alive. They know they are suffering. They know they might lose their homes, freedom of speech, etc., but won't vote out the people who are destroying them. He's not wrong. It's Stockholm Syndrome on a national scale. It's insane in the membrane. Well, thank you all for coming out this morning, for you've watched this show, especially if you watched it to the end. I appreciate it so much. I really appreciate my followers and subscribers. We're still about 33 subscribers away, I believe, from for achieving the first milestone, well, the second milestone in YouTube, where we actually can start making a little income to maybe finally get some better equipment. And as for Rumble, we're getting another follower again. Thank you very much. So maybe we'll be able to figure out what the issue is with X. Maybe we'll finally let us start creating some broadcasts. I don't know why. It says that there's too many existing broadcasts, perhaps, in the queue. Something online said if you have over 100 or 100 or so, starts eating up too much data and won't let you create a new one. Maybe there's a delay in the server purging the information on the account for me to create a broadcast on X. We will see if there is one tomorrow. If you come back tomorrow for second breakfast. Thank you all. We'll see you then. Until then, bye-bye. And let's get that intro working right.